Joe, you've been on is it the Mesa Police?
Yeah,
Force?
Mesa Police Department.
Well, Mesa Police Department, and you've been on since, was it 2000?
2004, April 2004.
Okay, so you've had different assignments during that time.
Correct.
So what, 15 years now?
Yeah.
One of those assignments that you had was Undercover.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I'm very interested to get an idea of some of the stories, and it's a lot different when you have someone who's actually dealing with this firsthand, dealing with certain things, as compared to getting media reports or secondhand news, so to speak, on things like crime and drugs. And even for me, it would be things like, well, how much does the family affect something like this?
Yeah.
I've got a friend that's also, he just retired from the police department, but he would he would say a lot of things about, he'd actually be the guy that would come in oftentimes. The police would get a call. It might be a domestic violence issue, or he'd come in and he'd be the one kind of calming down the situation. He'd be the one seeing exactly what was happening. People are at the very heights of emotions at this time. And so he would get a really good idea of kind of what's the family structure, what's the dynamic that's going on, and things like that. So I'm going to ask you a few things about that, because that's something that really interests me. But I wanted to start off at kind of your background. All right. and what brought you to the police department and deciding to do what you're going to do. Were you born in Taylor?
I was born and raised in Taylor, Arizona.
Okay.
So not a lot of people have heard of it. It's a very small town. I mean, my graduating class, less than 200 people, like 160, 170 people. So not a very big area. Mm-hmm. Very rural.
What was that like? I mean, did you enjoy that?
It was the best thing ever. I mean, it was kind of one of those things when I talk about my childhood, especially with people, it's like, I grew up in a small town, the whole thing, growing up, a lot of people didn't lock their doors. You were in and out of people's houses that you knew without ever even knocking. Mm-hmm. I had a blast growing up. It was a lot of fun.
A lot of outdoor stuff. You a hunter?
Stuff, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, fishing, hunting, camping, from a very early age. Some of the earliest memories I have of my grandfather and my dad were fishing and hunting and camping and just doing outdoor stuff.
Okay. Now you had your dad was a Vietnam vet.
Correct.
And how did that affect your upbringing, do you think?
It affected, I didn't realize, I guess, how much it did until I was a lot older. Mm-hmm. My great-grandfather served in World War I. My grandfather actually went to California to sign up and joined and go fight in World War II. And when he got to California, the war ended. So kind of one of those things. Great uncle was in Vietnam. In Korea. My dad was in Vietnam. And I was raised around a lot of guys that either served in Vietnam, World War II vets. So from a very early age, I think it established a fondness and a love for the United States, for mm-hmm. America. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize it. It was just always there. The reverence for certain things was always there, and it just was normal. That's just how life was.
Do you think that's changing at all right now?
It is. I think it is. And I think the reason why it's changing is there's not a lot of lessons about our history taught in school anymore. They kind of breeze over a little bit of World War I and World War II, but they don't really talk about how that affected our country. World War I were millions of people throughout the world. When you talk about on both sides of the conflict, were killed, and it was very violent. It was you want to talk about technology? This was the first time in the history of the world that we had modern weapons, and just the absolute just devastation that it caused. Mm-hmm. So like I said, my great grandfather came back, and he was very close. My dad was very close to him, and so I think a lot of that really bled over into my upbringing. And a lot of the lessons that I learned, I didn't learn from school. I learned from people that actually were there and learned from those events. Like I said, there's a guy called Grandpa Charlie growing up. He wasn't my grandpa, but he was a World War II vet. Other people that I knew that were vets. And so I learned a lot of things directly from them. My dad was a massive history buff, especially American history. And so he read and learned everything that he possibly could about those conflicts. I mean, that was really why one of the main reasons why he joined was reading about World War II and being around guys like that.
Do you think, did he ever say that he was, I mean, obviously the GIs that came back from World War II, a lot of them had a very different experience coming back home.
They did.
Than the Vietnam vets. Did he talk about that at all?
He did. So he actually joined, him and his best friend joined at the same time. They're both seniors in high school. And at the time, they gave you a furlough if you were still in high school. That's
crazy. I mean, to me, it's not crazy, but to think of myself as a senior in high school, that I'm now going to go off to Vietnam and be in life-threatening situations and in the military, that's insane to me. I mean, I don't know. It's
and it was kind of well. See, he didn't even talk to my grandpa about it really until after the fact, and just it was several months ago. I actually got letters that he wrote home. And in some of those letters, he was even at that time, even being in Vietnam and seeing the things that he did, he never wavered on his stance as far as what he's like, we are over here doing the right thing. We're over here trying to help these people. We're, trying to get them, basically make life for them better. So but he did say when he came back, he actually served when, at the time, you did 2 tours in Vietnam and you were able to come home. So he did his 2, volunteered for a 3rd, and when his 3rd was over, he volunteered for a 4th, and that 4th, they said they actually sent him to Seattle to finish out his 4th. They were like, no, you did 3. And in Seattle, they were very clear with him. Look, and he was like, he was called a baby killer. He was called all these different things and was treated pretty rough when he got home. So yeah, there wasn't the parades that they got, when World War II ended. There wasn't the celebration, if you will. It was very different.
That obviously doesn't sound like it affected him at all as far as how he felt about the country.
No, not even a little bit.
The purpose that he had.
Yeah, not even.
Did he ever say what he felt the purpose was?
Well, in his letter, he didn't talk a lot about it. And it's one of the biggest regrets that I had that I didn't make him write down a lot of the things, because there was only a couple times where he would talk about it, and it just, you could kind of see that far off look start, and he would kind of get, certain ways, and so he never really talked about it. But when he went over there, he was like, these people are, with the South Vietnamese, he's like, they were being, it's like, we are trying to free them of the oppression of the North Vietnamese, the communism and all that. He was over there, he was like, we are fighting evil. They were slaughtering people. They were truly trying to oppress people, and that was one of his things. He said it to my grandfather. He's like, even though, he goes, I know what the news says, he goes, but I know what we're doing here is right. So, like I said, that was kind of just a little bit of insight I got. And like he passed away 3 years ago. So I got these letters 2+ years after he passed. And so I'm just now reading these, and I can, even reading them, I can hear him speaking, just because of the way that he always was. That was a big thing. The flag, the things that it stood for, this country. He held a reverence to that that never wavered ever.
Did that have an effect on you deciding to be in the police force?
It did. So it's kind of funny. So September 11, 2001. Still remember that day very clearly. And so I was working, and the place that I worked East Coast hours. So all my business was East Coast. And so when that happened, I remember listening to the radio station, and obviously the news was not the same as it is now. And so they were making a joke, oh, some idiot just flew a plane into the World Trade Center again, because it happened before. Well, when I got to work, a buddy of mine was like, hey, you need to watch this. And I walked in and I watched the second plane hit the tower. I watched it collapse, and I remember just being pissed off. So they sent us home early, and I was actually driving to a Marine Corps recruiting station. I was signing up, And I had just been married 2 months, hadn't even been married 2 months. And my dad called me. We were talking. I told him what I was doing. He's like, "Have you talked to your wife yet?" I was like, "No." He's like, "Well, you should talk to her first." We were young, and she didn't tell me no, but she's like, "I just don't know how I feel about it." So I made the decision not to. Fast forward 2 years, my best friend from a very, very young age graduated from the Arizona Highway Patrol Police Academy. And the minute I saw him walk across stage and have that badge pinned on, I knew. I was like, "That's if I can't go overseas and fight, I'm going to do something here." And so I basically made the decision at that point. That's what I was going to do.
So it wasn't something lifelong that you felt like that's what you wanted.
No, but I always felt like I had to do something. I it's kind of the same thing. My dad, he's like, you have all this. This was it's not just free. There's there's a lot of people that paid for the life that you live. And so I've always kind of had that, like, I got to give something back. And so that was didn't know what it was, didn't really have an idea, but that was kind of where it just wound up going.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you decide to become a cop.
Yeah.
You go into the force. Now you do end up becoming an undercover cop for a while. Is that something you chose? Is that something that was offered to you, or you chose it?
I did choose
Why,
that.
why did you go after that?
Well, there was two things that I've always wanted to do within the police department. One of those, we have a task force that basically it's our violent offender task force, and the only people that they go after are the baddest of the bad dudes. I mean, the murderers, the people that are basically that 1% of society that truly preys on everybody else. Mm-hmm. So I always kind of had an idea of going that way. Well, to get there, you have to have certain things, and so is that just a sense that you want to protect people, or is it you just have a feeling like I really want to fight the bad guys? Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. I hate bullies. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, that's what it boils down to. Is I just don't like bullies, and it just it just bothers me. Mm-hmm. I just don't like those people that, hey, you know what, I'm just gonna go. And when I say bully anybody, hey, I'm gonna go steal stuff. I'm gonna go. Yeah, you worked hard for this. I'm gonna go take it. Or those people are like, hey, they murder innocent people. They, the rapists, all those types of people. Like, mm-hmm. I just don't really have a whole lot of tolerance, I guess, for that type of behavior. Mm-hmm. So to get over to that unit, you do have to have a background in certain areas, whether it's a SWAT background, and I've never wanted to do SWAT. It's nothing that's ever really appealed to me. So when I had the opportunity to go work in the unit that I did, I was a part of our tactical utility squad. So yeah, part of my job was to do undercover stuff, but the other part was to be on the side where when it was time to take off the guys we were buying from, or the runners, or do whatever, that was our job. So we did a lot of that, of like, hey, okay, we've been buying from these dudes, or hey, we had a big, sometimes it was a couple pounds of meth that the deal was set up, and our job was to come in. They had no idea we were coming, and we took them off.
You've probably got a lot of stories.
Yeah.
From that time. What did, let me ask you this, generally speaking, what did you learn during that time that you were you mostly was it mostly drug trafficking and
we did prostitution, mm-hmm. We did human trafficking, so we helped out with that on that part of it. But yeah, mainly we dealt with drugs, and if there was weapons involved, buying stolen guns if that came up, stolen property. But a lot of it was dealing with the illicit drugs. Did that change your mind at all about your optimism about humanity? No. Just dealing with that kind of a person so often? No, I never really. It was a game. Mm-hmm. When I thought about it, when I really got into it, it was nothing more than a game. I was a good guy, they were the bad guy, and all it was I was playing a game. And if you played it well, then you did all right. And the reason why I always was treating it like a game is I never wanted to lose the family side of it. Mm-hmm. Because we weren't like deep undercover. It's not like we went and but you had to live a different lifestyle. Well, I mean, you're tatted out. Yeah. You're a bigger guy. You have I remember your hair was very long. Yeah. You had the beard. I mean, you looked like you were a member of the Hells Angels for a while there. Yeah, it was pretty rough, yeah. Yeah, so your wife was okay with that? And she got used to it, yeah. So it took a while, but towards the end, she started liking it. But you're in that
that guise there. I mean, you're that way because you're trying to get in with a certain crowd.
Yeah, and I actually had some guys that had done it for a lot of years prior to going back into that unit, and so they really taught me a lot. And they didn't have long hair, they didn't have all that, but they could talk to anybody, and that was one thing. And I've always had that gift. I've always been able to talk to anybody, but trying to buy drugs from somebody and convince them that you're who you say you are is a whole different animal. So
explain that.
Well, there's just having a normal conversation with somebody is easy. You want to be articulate, you want to sound a certain way, you want to be somebody that somebody likes to talk to. Well, when you're talking to drug dealers, there's the lingo that you use, the way that you text, or the way that you talk. It's very different. When you're talking about these guys, obviously, there's a lot of curse words, and there's a lot of things that are exchanged, different things. And that's just normal conversation with them.
Does that bring you down at all? I mean, really, if you're putting yourself you're in that world constantly then, in that point, right? Did you come home to your wife and kids and it's just like, thank goodness, I've got a break from this for a little while?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And it got, really what got old was just that you always had that phone with you to make, because, hey, drug dealers work every single day, all day. Phone would go off at 2:00 in the morning. You'd have to go from sleeping to, okay, I remember what who I was talking to. So I never had an issue switching back and forth. The issue that I had is if I was with the family and that phone rang or something happened, being like, okay, you guys go away. So dad can talk.
So I can be this guy for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever make any mistakes on that, like forgetting who you were speaking with?
No, and I never. I got lucky in that sense. I never did that. It does happen. But I never.
I do that all the time now. I just
yeah.
I think I'm texting someone else and I send the wrong text.
Yeah. So no, I kept that. I was able to keep that pretty good, and I wasn't there a long time. It was a couple years, and in the grand scheme of things, that really wasn't that long. So it wasn't something that was, I'm trying to think of the best way. I never really got really into it because I didn't spend a ton of time there.
What's the craziest story you have from that time being undercover?
Yeah, it's funny when people say what's the craziest thing, because for it was normal. So when I think of craziness, you just think of all the. Probably one of the, I don't know if it's crazy, but we were getting ready to go serve a search warrant on a building, drug related. It was an auto shop, and we're all just kind of hanging out. It's kind of one of those things where everything gets planned, you go to do it, and then next thing you know, we're sitting under a tree at a park just waiting for the go-ahead because we have to wait. But while we're waiting, basically we get a phone call. It's like, hey, this dude that committed an armed robbery a couple days ago, he just jumped on a city bus. So my whole team jumps in, and next thing you know, we're commandeering a city bus and taking this dude off, with rifles and shotguns and everything else. And all these people are kind of just like, what in the world? And we just scoop them up, take them off the bus, and don't say a word. We're like, okay, thanks, see you later. And then this dude disappears. So, we did stuff like that quite often, just like grabbing people. They had no idea we were coming. And the next thing you know, 5-6 dudes jump out of a van, all, looking like me with guns. And then we just grab and scoop them up and we disappear. So that, so just it was stuff like that, just driving. We drove everywhere, all over the place, because we weren't just exclusively within our city. We worked with a lot of federal agencies. We did things with the DEA, a couple, other 3-letter, organizations. And so we were all over the place doing different things.
Did this never brought you down at all? Mentally, emotionally, was it taxing, or you said it was a game? Was it actually fun to you?
It was fun.
Okay.
It was fun. And I think what really benefited me was I went into it with quite a few years on and doing different things. And so I had gone through a transition to where, and it's kind of a transition that a lot of officers go through. You get in and everybody tells you, don't take your job home, don't take your job home. You don't want that to affect your family life. And so I built this just shell around me for so many years that nothing good could come in. So the good feelings didn't come in, the bad feelings didn't come in, and I was just a very distant, cold person to everybody, family, kids. And So when that finally broke, and it was, in fact, it was almost 6 years ago next month that broke. And so when that broke, it was rough for me, because I didn't expect it. But once it did, then I knew, okay, I'm good. I matured a lot. A lot of other things happened about that time. And so when I got into those positions, it was just a game. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't bring it home. Stories were cool. We could talk about it. And that's where I think the biggest thing, I would let the wife know, hey, this is kind of what we were doing, if I could, just talking to her. And so it wasn't affect me that much.
Didn't bring you down.
Yeah.
So something I'm really interested with this is just thinking about like the social dynamics of that world where you're in. We were talking. I've got a friend that's a cop, was a cop, and he would get a phone call. They'd come in, and let's say that there was a domestic violence call, and he'd come in and they'd usually grab the guy, or settle the situation down. So a little bit of babysitting, a little bit of psychology that had to be put into place.
Yeah.
And then, but he'd always come back with these stories, and it's like there's a certain sense of reality, I think, with being on the street and seeing firsthand how things can get.
Yeah.
When you're living a certain way and making certain decisions, or you're in a certain culture. And so he'd talk a lot about the family dynamic, or the background that a lot of these people have. And so, I mean, what did you see in that world, or still see in that world, that is lacking so much? I mean, what's the difference? A lot of people would say, look, it's who you're born to. It's the situation you're born into. You're kind of doomed in some ways, right? Because you've got a certain environment that you're in. And therefore, there should be some more tolerance and understanding of what's going on. What is missing so much there in that world?
And I can say this. In certain aspects, it doesn't matter where or how you were born. I mean, I've been in some of the worst places that you can think of, and the houses were super clean. The people were very well mannered. And then I've been in $1 million neighborhoods. These homes are worth millions of dollars, and we're there all the time because the husband and wife just fight and fight and fight. And, so I think a lot of it comes down to there's usually something underlying there, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's some sort of substance, whether it's pills or whatever it might be. There's something that's sometimes, and I'm not going to say all the time, but more likely than not, there is that underlying issue. A lot of the times it would be late in the evening, early morning hours that these things would go, because the drinking was involved. So they've been drinking for hours, and then that's when, I can't stand the way that you walk down the hall, or something very minor like that would take place, and then you'd have these massive blow-ups. A lot of times it's just relationship issues, and whether they don't want to admit that it's over, they would rather stay and fight and argue and be miserable than say, hey, I think it's time we go our separate ways.
How often is alcohol and drugs involved in a situation?
Probably 90 to 95%.
Yeah. Whether it's about the drugs, or they're on the drugs, or they've been drinking, or and that's what my understanding is. When you see, let's say, a young guy that is dealing drugs, is there typically, are you able to see a situation where maybe their family life is not what it should be? Is that usually what you see, or do you usually see a broad spectrum of everything?
Be anything. I mean, it really can. You see it from just any number of standpoints. Really, you get those people that's where they were grown up. That's how they were raised. The neighborhood. That's just what you did. Sometimes it's just, hey, I have to feed a habit, and I just found out that if I sell some of this stuff, I can get more money, and it feeds my habit, and I can just keep doing this. Some people just, hey, I made a lot of money, and I'm going to keep doing it. So a lot of it just it varies, from person to person. And so there's a lot of it. Yeah, it is cultural. There's a lot of it that is, the how and what, the way they were raised, but I've dealt with just everything you can think of, and it's just a decision that somebody makes.
What are the worst issues right now? I mean, we hear a lot about the opioid crisis, for example, right now. We've got really good friends that their son had a very, very close call. And I have other friends where I know that there's been issues. It's usually with the kids, but actually one was with the mom. But this opioid crisis is a big issue. Did you run across that a lot, or?
Yeah. So a lot of it, and it's kind of a natural progression. If you can get somebody to actually really talk to, hey, how did you? Because you don't just go to heroin. Mm-hmm. Heroin's pretty nasty. It's not something you just wind up like, hey, yeah, I'm going to try that. There's always a progression, and usually it starts with a prescription pill that they become addicted to, and as
which, like you said, that could be anybody.
It can be anybody, and that's usually what it boils down to. It is just about anybody. So they're taking the pills, and when they first came out, doctors were just writing those scripts. Hey, cool, no problem. But then once they get cut off and coming off of an opioid, it's terrible. You talk to anybody that has come off of it, they are physically in pain, and a lot of them would rather choose death than go through the withdrawal symptoms. So the next thing somebody tells them, hey, heroin's a lot cheaper and the high's way better. And so they'll usually they'll find somebody.
And you don't need a prescription.
And you don't need a prescription. So they'll get it, and it starts off, they'll smoke it, and and so they get that, and then it just becomes a snowball effect.
Yeah, and it just gets worse.
It just gets way worse.
And my understanding is that some people are just pre-programmed biologically for some of that. Some people they hit it once and they're done. I mean, it's
some, yeah.
And some people are not affected as much by it.
And so there's physiologically, when there's certain things that we do within our life, that when you get such a massive dump of endorphins and dopamines that your body's like, that was awesome, I want to do that again. However, you'll never get back to that level of feeling that again. So when somebody does take a drug, that's why it's called chasing the high. The first time they get high, your body dumps all these endorphins in your brain, in your body, and you feel so good, but you can never get back to that level again because it just naturally doesn't do that. Mm-hmm. The only other thing that does that is sex. That's the same thing. So sex and drugs within the the physiological
rock and roll, no?
Yeah, a little bit of rock and roll. You can throw that in there, but you'll never get back to that first time the way that you felt, because your body just cannot produce those chemicals and the endorphins to get you back up there. So they will continue to do whatever they can to mimic the first time that they got high, whether that's up and, hey, you know what, I'm gonna, instead of doing my normal, I'm going to try a little bit more, or I'm going to throw something else in it, now I'm going to start injecting it. And then they're always trying to get back to that, hey, I remember when, and they're chasing the dragon.
And so I guess that's something I've never thought about. So the addiction part of it is, it's not just your body saying,
yeah,
I need something right now. It's a matter of, I want to get back to that state.
Yes.
Where I was.
Yep.
That's
they
interesting.
Want to feel that again. And you talk, I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people, and that's kind of, and anybody that's really honest, that they will tell you that, yeah, all I want to do is I just want to feel that again and feel that again. Even though they can't, and there's they keep trying different ways to get back to that high, and they can't.
Yeah. Did you come across? You said one of the things that you deal with is prostitution.
Yeah.
Do you deal a lot with, let's call it, let me understand your terminology here. If I talk about human trafficking, right, are you including that with prostitution directly, or it just can be prostitution?
So when I say that, I use those terms very separately.
Yeah,
Because
okay,
you
good.
have-
That's
you have
what
the
I
women-
figured, yeah.
Yeah, you have the women that they do it all on their own. That's how, some of them, that's how they make their living. Some of them make a very good living doing that. They are not trafficked by anybody. They do that just for themselves. Then you have the women, or even sometimes, a lot of cases, young men that get caught up in this, and somebody just catches them right at the right time, and they basically become enslaved to that person. And they're told, hey, if you leave me, I'll kill you. They feed them dope, whatever they have to do to keep them. And all they do is they just pimp them out and just take them from place to place. And usually it's in pretty sleazy motels or, hotels close to freeways, airports, different things. And they just keep them.
So I've looked into this a little bit. And so for the benefit of the audience here, so in other words, someone could be, technically saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and this is part of what this is how I'm making a living.
Yep.
But in a sense, as you said, in some ways they're enslaved to it.
In some
they're some may not be, but some may be, especially people that are brought into the country from other places. It's like, hey, if you want to be able to stay here, or
Yeah, that's happened. Yeah.
This is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And so when people are saying human trafficking, which is something that comes up a lot now, that term, in your mind, that has to be somewhat of someone who is coerced, at least.
Yeah, they are.
You would say, right?
Yeah, they really don't have a choice. That somebody else is making that choice for them. And part of the job that we had was we were tasked to work with our human trafficking unit, and that was one of the things that we did, was we tried to find individuals that basically were victims. And so we would go out and we would get phone numbers and start texting different people, and our whole job was to find these types of people and get them out of that lifestyle. And we were able to find a couple. We were able to track them down, and we got them, and they admitted, yeah, I'm not free to leave. The guy's staying in the room across the hall doing whatever. And so we were able to get them out, and hopefully they decided to get themselves help and didn't come back to it. A lot of times they were just women that, hey, I'm just looking to make some money, and that's all I'm doing.
Do you see it as a growing problem, human trafficking?
Yeah, it is a growing problem. And I think, maybe it's not a growing problem, but it's a problem that now has really been brought to the forefront. There's a lot of nonprofit groups that are really big on this. One of them is the Operation Underground Railroad. The guy that founded that, he worked for the government, and he basically got tired of having his hand tied by red tape and bureaucracy, and he was like, I'm done. So he started this nonprofit.
I think he's LDS.
He is.
Yeah.
And so he started it, and that's all he does. He still works very closely with agencies and different things, but his whole thing is, I'm not going to allow another person to disappear because
I think
red
his
tape.
background was, I read a little on him a few years ago. I think that his background was he was in the military or in a government, somewhere in government.
Yep.
And I think he was overseas at first.
He was.
And he saw just, especially kids, little kids. That were trafficked.
Correct.
Constantly. And he could never get it out of his system.
Yeah.
And he's just like.
So, and then there was, and I believe it was in Haiti, I think was the one that actually really got him. And he was like, and because they were delayed by obviously, just going through the hoops and doing everything that they had to do, and the red tape, they weren't able to actually find the kids that he was looking for.
Yeah.
And again, I'm paraphrasing. I've read a lot, and in fact, we have mutual friends that are very good friends with him, and so we kind of got a little bit insight to that as well. And they're just like, I just can't do that anymore. He had to find a way to just make it happen and do it right there, and he's been very successful with it.
I think that something like that, the satisfaction that guy must have. Obviously he sees so many horrible things, and so you're exposed to it all the time, but to make a difference in that way with that specific issue, I think that that's got to be pretty fulfilling. That's got to make you feel pretty good.
Yeah.
Not to get too political on this at all, but so with the drugs and with the human trafficking, one of the big political issues right now is building a wall on the border. Now, we're a border state here.
Yeah.
Aside from immigration, is from what you've been able to if you were intelligence gathering in your job, would that make a difference, do you think, or not, as far as the human trafficking and the drugs? I mean, we have to say, I think, on our side here, because most of the drugs come from the south of the border, right, is there's a huge demand.
There is, yes.
Right? I mean, we create a massive demand for these things here, and that's our own issue, is creating the demand. And so now there's demand and supply, there's both sides of it, and we seem to focus a lot more on the supply side. But obviously, I mean, it would help. I mean, if there was...
It would help. It would, because we have a lot of it's just brought over on foot. You have these traffickers that they pay people, hey, you're going to carry this from point A to point B, you're going to get it across the border, you're going to wait there, somebody's going to come pick it up, and you're going to come back. And that's all that they do. So if there was, it would slow it down. Would it stop it? No. I mean, that's one thing that the drug dealers have, is a lot of money and a lot of resources, and they will always find a way to get it here. If there's the demand, they will find a way to get it here.
Yeah. All right, so changing gears a little bit here. One of the things that's happened in the last several years is a kind of a cultural shift a little bit. I mean, at least partially in the U.S., on an attitude toward cops. And it's kind of strange. I mean, to me it is. But going back, 20, let's see how many years now. I had been reading some stats knowing that I was going to be speaking with you. And it was in the 90s that President Clinton signed the crime bill, the massive crime bill. And part of that was, the reason for that was that violent crime was increasing by 5% a year.
Yeah.
It peaked, I think it was 87 or something like that, or somewhere back in the late 80s. And so 5% every year, the violent crime rate is increasing. And so there's support from the inner city, the African American communities, there's support from Congress and the Senate, overwhelmingly passed. And they end up putting 100,000 new police officers across the country with partial federal funding to help support this with the cities and the counties and the states, et cetera. Well, crime went down. Violent crime went down. I don't know about the rest of the crime, but I don't think that went down. That might have actually increased because there's more arrests.
Yeah.
But violent crime dropped at that time. And I don't think that especially in the inner cities, that everybody got what they wanted out of that crime bill. A lot of people wanted a lot more preventative measures. But overall, right, there was a sense that this was a great thing, and violent crime goes down, and that's the number one statistic that people are going to look at. But incarcerations went up, and now it's kind of like we're on the flip side. We want to have our cake and eat it too, it seems, where it's like, okay, well, there's all this incarceration. People are being put into jail for smoking a joint. And should they really go to jail for that? And then the whole 3 strikes thing for mandatory life sentence, and there were some pretty rough things that went along with that. But there seems now, from the same people that supported that, there seems to be a major backlash now, where it's like, well, now we don't want the cops here. We don't want people in certain areas, and there's a big highlight on abuse and. What you're in that world, what do you see happening there?
Well, I think what happened for a lot of years, especially in the 90s, when you had that, especially like when you're talking like the inner cities, California, New York, the coast, and different places, Chicago, the gang problem was massive, and it just started getting really bad. And so that was part of that initiative, was they actually started charging actual gang statutes with it. And what that does is it enhances a crime. If you do something to further a street gang, you automatically get additional sentencing on top of whatever else you would normally get. So that was kind of where it started. What people didn't have was, you didn't have cell phone cameras, you didn't have body cameras, you didn't have all these things that highlighted that sometimes police work gets pretty dirty. Sometimes if you get into fights with people and it's not pretty. And when that really started becoming more public, a lot of people were really upset, like, hey, that you guys, this is bad. And it's like, sometimes it is. And I'm not saying, there's obviously times where an officer most
crosses the line.
Yeah,
sure.
And you have to deal with that. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of things that we do that when we talk about it, Our training is very simple. We stop fights as soon as we possibly can in order to limit the amount of injuries that officers are going to sustain, the suspect's going to sustain, whatever. And the sooner that is stopped, the less the injuries somebody has. And when you see somebody get punched in the face or you see something happen, we all watch UFC, it's violent. People bleed, things happen. But we also train that, hey, look, if somebody is, at this level of violence, we're here. We're never the same. Because if we're the same, we're going to lose. So we have to be a little bit higher, but then we have to be able to drop it right back down the minute that is taken care of. So that's the biggest thing.
So give me an example of that. What would that?
So a lot of people are like, oh, well, that guy just had a knife, so take out your taser. Well, a knife and a taser are two very different things. The taser has a failure rate of 50%. That is a study. They fail 50%
That's pretty
of
high.
the time. It's very high. Because a lot of things
That's
go
not
into
good
it.
odds.
No, it's not. And so and the reason why it does that is if you're wearing it almost has to be perfect. You have to have the perfect spread on the prongs. You have to be able to do this. And if somebody is chemically enhanced through drugs or other things, sometimes it just doesn't work, or they can defeat it, or whatever it is. So we up our level of force. And hey, we shot somebody that was threatening somebody else with a knife. Well, yeah, sometimes that happens. And if they're not going to listen, if we're telling them to drop the knife and we're asking them to do things and they don't listen, we can't say please 1,000 times and hope the 1,000th time that works. So there's a lot of things that come into play, and a lot of it is, and it's you look across the country, there's issues that come up in certain areas. Obviously, a lot of it is race related. There's a lot of things that come into that, but we are a responding force. I mean, we are not proactive when we're doing things. A lot of times that we go, somebody's already called the police and we're showing up to it. Now, there's times where you might be just right at the right place at the right time and you see something happening, but 96 to 99% of the time, we're responding to something that's already taken place. And then we're responding to whatever behavior is being displayed when we get there.
But needing to, at least in the very short term, escalate a little bit.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
So, and that's the thing is we're making...
I mean, it's force on force.
That is correct. And that's where I think where we're getting this is now you have everybody's a news reporter, whether you're on Facebook Live, streaming on Instagram, whatever it is, everybody has a platform now. So it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you have that device, you immediately become a member of the media and it gets used. Well, what we don't have is facts. And that's one of the biggest issues is you have a lot of these things, or context. So a lot of these issues are getting just blasted into the media before any investigation is done, before any facts or any context is released. And then 3 months down the road when the entire thing comes out, there might be you'll get 10, 15 days of this being blasted on the news. And then once all the facts come out, you might have just a very small 3-minute, news reports like, oh, well, this is what happened, and then they move on to something else. So there's part of that, and a lot of things, people, for whatever reason, the police work in general, they expect them to go into communities and fix those communities, and we can't. Now, we want to partner with communities, we want to help, but healing and all that comes from within the communities themselves. And we have to find a way to bridge the disconnect between the communities and those that work in law enforcement and come together and say, okay, we have issues within your community, whether it's a Hispanic community, Asian community, Native American community, whatever it is, and law enforcement, there's got to be something in place there.
Well, it's interesting because it is a racial issue oftentimes, or at least that seems to be the tension out there is.
It's what it's made out to be.
Yeah, or female.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, it's like here's the big bad bully cop on one end, and then here's the camera of how they're treating this woman. Of course, who knows how unruly she's been, or it's a racial issue. And so what ends up being portrayed, it seems, or that certain people try to portray, is that it is an oppressive issue here, that the police are oppressive and they're the bullies.
Yeah.
And of course, there are going to be examples where, like we said, that people cross the line. What I don't like is that there's this whole narrative that's kind of an umbrella, right, thrown over the whole thing.
Yeah.
That the police are bad, because that's really what you're saying. Is if I turn on the news, the cable news at night, which I don't do, but if I did, that's and something. There was a story about the police. It's going to be negative, and it's going to be, and of course we don't hear every great thing that happened that day across the country, where police intervened and helped a situation, whether it's helping a kid or whether it's stopping a really bad guy. You don't hear about it. Nobody hears. All you hear about is the most scandalous thing that happened that day somewhere and got caught on video.
Ratings. It's all ratings.
Yeah, it's clickbait. I mean, that's all it is, and it's a really unfortunate thing. How does that affect you and your colleagues today?
Well, personally, it never affected me. I went out and I did the same job. It didn't matter what.
But does it affect?
It does affect
policies and.
It does, absolutely. Unfortunately, the cultural shift does affect policies, and that's nationwide. It doesn't really matter what it is. Now, some of those policies need to be implemented. I'm not saying all of them are bad. Some of them need to be implemented, and some things need to be changed. However, a lot of the policies are being, a lot of things that happen, they're changing because of the pressure that they're getting from the communities that they live in. Now, that's one of the biggest issues is a lot of those communities, if we would bring them in and just discuss, hey, this is why we do the things that we do. This is the training that we have. And if there's something we need to refresh our training, by all means, we will do that. But this is what they were trained to do, and this is why they did that. So there needs to be something in place that will allow leaders in the community, and I'm not talking about vocal minorities. I'm talking about the grandma that runs her neighborhood, because everybody knows if you cross grandma, you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. And law enforcement be able to come together, because those are the real community leaders, the ones that everybody in the neighborhood respects, the ones that everybody knows. Those are the people we need to get in and speak to and say, how do we help you resolve some of these issues? Because we are not problem solvers in that sense. The things that we are sworn in to enforce laws, uphold the Constitution of the state that we serve, and do those types of things. And I think that's where a lot of this whole protect and serve came from, because all that was a motto developed by Los Angeles Police Department. That was it. It's just their motto. Well, for some reason, that became the standard for law enforcement. It was like, your job's to protect and serve. That's what it says. Now, that's just a motto that was created. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we have constitutional law that says, as police officers, we have no right to act at all. If we see somebody getting stabbed, shot, murdered, whatever, we don't have to do anything. Now, we absolutely will. There's a reason why everybody got into this job was to do that. But we have no right to act at all. So there's a lot of things that needs to be, that. What
do you mean you don't have a right to act?
Or an obligation, excuse me. We don't have an obligation to act. So let me clarify that. So meaning, like I said, hey, if we get there and an officer there's something violent going down and he doesn't do anything, and then he comes in and tries to render first aid, he's not held accountable for that. Now, again, there's not too many of us that are going to just stand by and watch that happen. But that's just because that's the makeup of 99% of the people that got into this job, is that's what they are here to do.
It seems to me that it's kind of like, it's like with everything, you have there's a spectrum that, at first, like in the 90s, you go back and you say, okay, now there's all these new policemen that are on foot, and their crime goes down and everybody's happy, and that's great. And then, but of course, when you kind of take from one area and you put it over here, well, you have taken from another area.
Yes.
And where you're taking from is maybe the tolerance and the strictness of the law and the enforcement. So if you put a lot more cops on the beat, so to speak, you're going to have more arrests.
And as population increases and as all those things continue to increase, your number of contacts with the police in general go up. Your crime rate will either stay steady or shift. Like you said, violent crime may have dropped a little bit, but drugs became a little bit more prevalent. You have other crimes that come in, burglary.
But wouldn't it be though? Maybe this isn't the case, but it seems to me that you're going to get a lot of the other blue collar crimes, but that stops the violent crimes, it seems, or might help in stopping some of the violent crimes.
I think I think what the biggest thing is you look at homicide rates have gone down, but ag assaults and the serious assaults have stayed about the same because you have medical advancements that we didn't have 20 years ago. That, hey, yeah, they might have died 20 years ago, so that would count as a homicide. Now it's just an assault or an aggravated assault.
But they're able to be saved, is what you're saying, medically. Yeah.
So medical, the medical treatment has improved enough that now we have somebody that maybe, like I said, 20 years would have died, but due to the medical care they received now, they've lived, and so it's not a homicide, it's an aggravated assault. So even though they might say, yeah, okay, homicide rates have gone down, the assault rate has stayed fairly steady. I mean, it's gone down a little bit, but it has stayed fairly steady. And then the other thing that we got into that is even a totally separate topic is how all these crimes are reported. They're all reported by the FBI, and they have reporting standards. So what I might write in my report doesn't meet their standards, so it's going to get changed when they do their official reporting. So there's also that pretty significant disconnect there.
So there's a filter.
Yes. Yeah.
In the statistics.
Absolutely.
And when it goes national, when it goes to a national agency. Yeah, that's interesting. All right. What about, now you said that you enjoy, usually it's game to you when you've gone out, especially undercover, but that may not be the case with everybody all the time.
No.
PTSD. Yep. Is that an issue that comes up a lot in the job there? I mean, I imagine that I would imagine most cops don't deal with, they deal with a lot of conflict, but probably don't deal. How many cops are going to deal with someone where they've actually had to shoot someone or?
Well, and that's not as prevalent, but when you talk about the post-traumatic stress that comes from it, a lot of that comes from events that, hey, the baby that drowned, the things
you see a lot of
stuff.
You
see a lot of stuff. And I had a conversation just recently with somebody about this. It's like, think about somebody that was in the military, that they got deployed for 6 months, they were in combat, they saw a lot of stuff. Maybe that was the only deployment they went on, was that 6 months, and they come back and they have that post-traumatic stress. Now you had somebody that's been in a law enforcement agency the size of the one that I'm in, and you've been there for 15, 16 years. Yeah, it might not be the same as combat, but over that course of the 15, 16 years, I can't even tell you the number of extremely violent homicides I've been to, baby deaths, drownings, other things that are a constant throughout my career that still have that same impact.
Sure.
So it's not the same by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of it doesn't even come from being involved in a shooting. A lot of it's from stuff that, people really don't, like you even look like the shooting that took place in the Connecticut school. All the officers that went in there saw all those kids that were shot and killed. Most of them suffered some pretty significant traumatic stress, which I can totally, sympathize with. But you have a lot of people saying, well, that's the job you signed up for, so you should be able to handle that. Well, that's totally different. Yeah, we knew that we'd see some things, but it's very different when you actually see something like that. And I tell people, I was like, there was one call. There's calls that I've gone to that really stick out. A lot of them kind of just blend in together, but there's certain events that have taken place that I remember and I recall very, very vividly. And it's hard to do your job in those cases. Like she was high school aged. Somebody broke into her house, assaulted her. And in fact, when they assaulted her, she dislocated her hip. So when me and the guy that got there first, we went to clear the house, she was laying in a puddle of her own urine, could not move. And as we're stepping over her to make sure nobody's in the house, she's grabbing at our pant leg, screaming for help. And you just have to say, we will be back. Even though everything inside of you wants to stand there and hold her hand, we have a job to do. So when somebody's screaming, to help you and not leave her, and you have to leave her, even though it's only going to be for a short time and come back, that's hard. Or some other things that happen. It's hard.
Sure.
So it stays with you.
So that's something to consider. I mean, I think when we look at the attitude of supporting your local law enforcement is it's not just a matter of going in and having the courage to use your training and to take care of a situation, of a conflict, and do all the dirty work for us, because that's really what it is,
exactly.
Right? The cops are out doing the dirty work for us, so we don't have to see those things.
Yeah.
But it is, yeah, I can totally see that. So it's a matter of, look, this is something that builds up. We've seen a lot of things here, and there's a cost to that.
And for a lot of years, it was just ignored. You were just told, hey, you're a big boy, you deal with it. And that's why the average life for a lot of years for an officer after retirement was only 5 years. Heart attack, stroke, whatever it was, that's all you got was 5 years. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward now to just several years ago, there's now a bill that was passed by the state of Arizona that says, hey, officers need to be treated for this stuff because it's, hey, they have that right to be treated. So that's where I think, and there's a lot of guys that, hey, yeah, all they need to do is talk to somebody. Hey, if they can talk to somebody, they can be taken care of. And you can salvage that career and you can salvage that individual, because most of the time it just becomes, hey, how do you deal with stuff like that? Well, you turn to alcohol, you turn to other things to numb it and do whatever you can do to sleep.
Do you see that quite a bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's where, the change has really shifted now. It's like, hey, we have to figure out a way to make it better and really take care of somebody that's been involved in a critical incident. And that's kind of what that is, that critical incident part, like I said, and it could be any number of things. And every person is affected by different stuff. So that's where, so you can't just put a blanket statement over, hey, this person saw it and was fine, and you went to it and somehow that affected you. Well, we're all wired a little bit differently.
Well, and you've all had different experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, you may have seen something similar already to that, and now you've seen it again, whereas another cop may not have had that experience.
Yeah.
It's new to them. Or what about the families of the cops then?
It's
dealing
hard.
with that.
It's really hard. I mean, Steph will be very honest with you, man. We went through some pretty rough times. Like I said, there was a lot of those years when I talk about that shell that I just formed around myself to. When that happened, there was I was very distant. I was not pleasant to be around, and I'll admit it. I was not a fun person to be.
But it's just your way of dealing with it.
It was my way of dealing with it, and it wasn't the right way, because instead of hey, don't take the job home, don't take the job home. Well, I didn't take anything home. Mm-hmm. I didn't come home, and so instead of being able to talk to Steph about what was going on, which I can now, there was nothing. So like I said, once that broke, and when it broke, it almost destroyed who I was at the time. Mm-hmm. But it also basically saved who I was as well. So mm-hmm. that was kind of a pretty big deal for me. But everybody has to deal with it their own way.
How did you deal with it?
Well, I started talking to Steph. I went to counseling for quite a while. My dad obviously had been through Vietnam and had anything that I had seen, he had seen. Mm-hmm. Every time I called him and I had something going on, he had something that he could relate to me in some way. So that was how initially, or I shouldn't say initially, in the end, that's how I dealt with it. Mm-hmm. I drank a lot for a while. I started drinking a lot. Mm-hmm. And that was an issue for me, especially when it was like, hey, I'm going to wake up in the morning and first thing that I felt like doing was grabbing a beer at mm-hmm. 10 o'clock in the morning. That was mm-hmm. an issue. So same thing. Hey, that's the only way that I could sleep was to
numb it.
Mm-hmm. And I still don't sleep. I don't sleep well. And Steph calls it the twitches. Like other times where, like when she builds a blanket, fort around her with pillows, because she's like, you just start twitching, and I've been hit a couple times, and so she goes, when I know that's happening, I just have to let it work itself out, and then you're good. Mm-hmm. So it's never goes away. It's always there, but you just have to learn to deal with it and talk to somebody.
What does the church help with that at all?
It does. And so that's another thing is we talk a lot about being a whole person. you have to be balanced. You have to have that work life, that family life, but there has to be something that centers you, whatever that may be. Whether that, and I've told people, I was like, I really don't care, what religion you're a part of, what your belief system is, but there has to be something that grounds you. And yeah, that does actually help a lot, because I can put everything into perspective for myself. And I can look at things and I can say, okay, hey, you know what, I have a different perspective on things, and that really does help. It does help with, for me.
Mm-hmm. As far as comfort, or is it's more an identity issue for you? You know what I mean? Does it give you?
It is comforting. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of things that you see, day in and day out that, like I said, you forget a lot about, the whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. But to have an eternal perspective, if you will, it gives you, it kind of just lets me sit back and say, okay, look, people are going to make their decisions. They're going to make their choices in life, whatever they may be. I cannot affect a lot of those, but what I can choose to affect is the way that I react to those things and how I look at them. And where do I go to find peace? Where do I go to feel happy? Because a lot of times, especially if you've been, just exposed to just some pretty horrific things, you've got to find something that makes you happy. Mm-hmm. And not hiding it, not masking it, but what truly makes you happy. And whatever that may be, you have to have that. You have to.
Well, if not, then you're going to drink a lot.
Yeah, you're going to drink a lot.
I mean, you're going to, because you have to have something, right? I mean, it's just human nature says, I've got to fill this void here with something. And and so, I think that I've had not experiences maybe of what I've seen, but of just trials and tribulations that I've gone through that eventually, even when I've ignored it, if I'm centered on certain principles, and perspective's pretty important.
And I think that's the biggest thing, is the perspective of the whole thing.
It changes your emotions. Yeah. I mean, it changes your emotions. It changes your state of mind. And it's kind of like, okay, you can go through these things and you can have these pictures in your mind and they're horrible, but I think it's like what you said, it's not that they go away, but if maybe I can get some kind of perspective and context and grounding right with something, then it's not all chaos. Then it's not,
And it's funny you bring up the word chaos. So my sergeant that I have now, he borrowed a book when he went on vacation of mine, and the whole premise of that book is order and chaos. That if you don't have any type of order, you live in a constant state of chaos, whatever that may be, and you cannot live and you can't thrive in chaos. And I think that's and as you bring that up, that's what the church gives me, is that order. Mm-hmm. That's what combats the chaos. I have that order. I have in my home, in my personal life. If those things are in order, you can deal with the chaos. If not, you get consumed by the chaos. And
the chaos never goes away, right? It just doesn't go away. I think that's part of the process. That's actually one of the taglines of my other podcast is order and chaos. And I put order first.
Always.
But it's kind of like, I mean, even going through the idea of the story of the creation and just everything, just the way the universe works, creation works, it's order coming in and entering into chaos and trying to take the chaos and manage it, which means creating more order, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's all that's happening. And if you go through the story of the creation, it's a matter of, okay, I've got light coming into the darkness, and then I've got an order of separating the water from the land, right? And then I've got categories of plants and categories of animals, and eventually separation of man and woman, right? But it's all a matter of, it's all creating some type of an order as you pass through the chaos. But the chaos is going to be inevitable, and you kind of plunge into chaos in your job.
Yeah, so like in Batman, right? When he was talking about in the very last one, he's like, you can't plunge your hands in the filth and and bring them out and be clean. They're always dirty. Mm-hmm. And that kind of like resonated with me a little bit, and I was like, that's pretty that's a pretty accurate statement. If you really get into this job for the right reasons and you really work hard, you just get thrown into the filth. You really do. And you can never really get clean. It's always with you. And there's only been a couple of days in my career that, like, I never thought I was going to come out of it, like, ever. And it wasn't violent. It wasn't crazy. It was just one of those things that it was, for me personally, it was just soul crushing. And and like I said, when it happened, I had no defense for it. None.
No. What do you mean by the defense on that? You had no experience with it, and you had no knowledge of how to handle it.
And it was so unexpected. It wasn't even like I was going to something that I was preparing myself for. It just was so unexpected that it literally just, it sucked everything out of me. And the way that everything inside of me broke into a million pieces, and there was nothing left.
Pure chaos.
Chaos. Oh. And all it did was, the way that my dad described it is, he's like, that event just brought just a tiny bit of humanity back into your soul that you had been missing for so long, that it just brought you back to basically being a normal person again. And that's really what it was. And I hadn't been that way for so long that I didn't recognize that. And so there was a lot of things that, took place that I just wasn't expecting.
So let me get this straight. So you go through this horrible experience, basically.
And the funny thing is when I look back on it, and it wasn't even horrible. Like, I remember almost everything about it. Everything. It wasn't even horrible, but it was horrible. I'm not going to say it wasn't horrible. It was, but at the same time, like, what I saw and the things that happened to me, it was just, I couldn't even describe it at the time. It was literally, I was like, I didn't know what I was to do, and then immediately after that. So to give you some context, so again, September 23rd, 2013.
So you know the date?
Know the date. Normal day, not a big deal. I get a call from a sergeant, say, hey, I need you to come to the hospital and help out on a call. Wasn't even my call, wasn't a big deal. I was like, all right, cool. So I show up, and it was a little girl. Her name is Violet, and she was 5 months old on that day. Her father had thrown her headfirst onto a concrete floor and shattered her skull. That's why she was in the hospital. So my sergeant was like, your job is to stand outside this hospital door, and if he shows up, there's a bed waiting for him. That was my whole job, was wait for him to show up. He didn't, but I was like, all right, cool. So I'm standing outside the door. The primary officer's doing his investigation. The nurse comes in, and the mother, who was not involved in this whatsoever, completely inconsolable, told the nurse, hey, I need to go use the restroom. So the nurse took Violet, and she went to the restroom, and she's like, officer, I need your help real quick. So I was like, all right, cool, whatever. It wasn't a big deal. She's like, I just need you to speak to her to see if she can move her eyes. I was like, okay. So as softly as I could, as tenderly as I could, I just started talking to her. I said her name. Nothing really happened, so I reached up and I just said her name again. I just kind of touched her cheek a little bit. And when I did that, she reached up. I can remember how her cheek felt. I can remember everything about her. Well, she just grabbed onto my finger and held it to her face. And her eyes she looked right in my face. That was it. And she just held onto my finger, and I stayed there until Mom came back. And for whatever reason, that I don't know, no clue why, but that still You know, you could see her head was swollen. She had, obviously her skull was pretty damaged, and it just broke me. It broke me. So I leave the hospital room, and as I'm leaving the room, we had an officer that was suffering from ALS, and I see the chief at the time and a bunch of other guys walk by, and they just grab me and like, you need to come with me. So I stand out and I go upstairs to where they took him, and I stood outside his room while he passed away. And his mom, his family, his wife, everybody was walking by me, in the room, out of the room, in the room, out of the room. And every single time, at one point his mom stopped and just goes, every time I look at you, I see my son. Dad, same thing. Never met him, never worked with the officer. I knew him, never worked with him. But I stood outside that room for hours until he officially passed. All same day.
Wow.
And then after he passed away, they pulled us into a room, talked to us for a little bit, and then, hey, all right, officer, your job's done. Go to work. And back to work I went.
And that's your job.
And that's my job. That's all of our jobs. So when I think about that, like I said, it's not like it was crazy. There was nothing crazy about it. But the way that my dad described it, he said, that little girl just put a little bit of your soul back in you that you were missing. And I hadn't felt anything like that ever while I was working. Like I said, I'd been on, I don't know how many homicides I'd been to. I had told people their family members had been dead. I had done so many other things. And for whatever reason, that little girl at that time
did
it.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Well, maybe just the innocence, that's there.
Probably,
and just drawing you back out of the chaos into that innocence. And
like I said, 6 years, and I can recall everything. Everything.
You got to write a book. All your experiences.
If I could write, I would.
Well, that's amazing, Joe. I mean, those are some amazing stories. Last thing, if you had your wish list on the for the police force, for the police nationwide, what would you wish that people knew? Is it kind of what you've gone over here today, or is it what do you want people to know about your job and what you guys do every day?
The biggest thing I think that everybody, it's like, look, we have no pretext on a lot of the things that we deal with, and so I was a field trainer for a lot of years, and so a lot of things that I told the newer officers, I was like, hey, you have to remember that whether you pulled somebody over and they've never been pulled over before, or you're going to an accident, you're going to a burglary, 90% of the things we do, we deal with the worst day of that person's life to that point. Like I said, they've never been in a car accident before, their brand new car got totaled, their house was broken, whatever it may be, that potentially is the worst day of that person's life. For us, it's nothing. For us, it is, this is every single day. But on the flip side of that, we have to have that compassion for them. A lot of times you got to remember, hey, yeah, we did pull you over, but take a deep breath, figure out what's going on before you immediately point blame or whatever it may be. That compassion goes both ways. Like I said, the minute I left that hospital, I went right back to work. Nobody knew what I dealt with before. So maybe I wasn't the best at communicating. Maybe it wasn't, whatever it may have been. Got to realize that there's a lot of times that what we get done, we go right back to work. So yeah, what they want us to treat people with compassion and respect, all those things. It needs to be also, the same way.
Sure.
Because that's the thing. And if we can do that to each other, a lot of the issues that we have will just go away.
Well, everybody's an individual, just treat everyone as an individual. Yep. And, that's one of the things that I talk a lot about is the collective versus the individual. I mean, once you put everybody as just a cop, right, as in this group, and you start getting an idea or a narrative about the group, then you're not Joe anymore.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
You're just whatever that thought is of that group that you have.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing to deal with. And, everybody's an individual, everybody's a human being, and everybody has a lot of experiences and problems and issues. And, I worry a little bit about right now, I think we're moving more and more in every way, politics, everything, into kind of this collective idea of everybody's in a group. And I'm going to treat you like you're in the group. And it just takes humanity away from everything. And you've got to talk, you have to deal with people on an individual level.
Absolutely.
And respect that they have their own agency. Well, I appreciate your time, Joe. This has been amazing. That story of the little girl is going to stick with me for a long time. That's very touching. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Enjoy it.